Hey everyone, this is Allie Sorley again with the Alabama Museum of Natural History, wanting to welcome you to Bama Bugfest on the Web. It's a virtual event dedicated to the fascinating world of insects. Bama Bugfest on the Web is a collaborative event brought to you by the UA Museums, the Mildred Western Warnevelt Transportation Museum, the Alabama Museum of Natural History, the Department of Research and Collections, UA Rogers Library, and the Tuscaloosa Public Library. We are offering 9 total days of bug-themed content starting on July 7th and ending July 25th. For a full schedule of events, you can visit the website bamabugfest.org. Today we are talking all about water bugs, and we're about to jump into the wonderful world of water bugs segment with Dr. Milt Ward. He is a professor emeritus with the Department of Biological Sciences and curator of insects at the Department of Research and Collections. Hey, Dr. Ward.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well. How are you? Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the intro. Thanks for being invited to join. I really enjoy it.
Great. So I think today we're going to talk all about one of my personal favorite subjects, which is water bugs. But before we do that, I think it would be great if everyone kind of got to know you a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. I'm born and raised in Montgomery and went to undergraduate school here at the university. And my wife and I met here when we were undergraduates. After graduating, we went on to get PhDs at Michigan State University. My wife was in botany, aquatic botany, and I was in streams and river and aquatic ecology, aquatic insects. After a couple of years at Oregon State University, we came to the Department of Biological Sciences at the university, joined the faculty there. We're there for 32 years and retired a few years back. Still involved with the museum as curator. So I'm a river, stream, wetland ecosystem ecologist with a joy in working with aquatic insects.
That sounds fascinating. I think I had mentioned to you before that I am very, very personally very interested in water ecology in general, but stream ecology is one of my favorites, and wetland ecology is so interesting. So I think I'm just excited about this conversation. I'm going to nerd out on you a little bit, but that's okay. So how did you get into researching aquatic macroinvertebrates?
Well, it was not a long journey. I knew in high school I was going to be a biologist. That was pretty clear. Field biology, ornithology, which I took in college, courses I took in college, but I took an aquatic ecology course my senior year, and that's when I knew that was what I wanted to do. And then when my master's degree, I added benthic aquatic invertebrates to my master's thesis research. That was something I was really fascinated with. So I followed that up and worked on aquatic insects for my PhD. And I find them fascinating, diverse, complicated, and I think that complexity is something that interested me, working out the problems and the complexities.
And I think too, it's a subject that maybe not a ton of people know about, but that they're here all over the place. So what did you find most interesting about that subject? Was it the complexities or?
Well, I obviously knew about aquatic insects before I became really interested in them. But once I started actually seriously collecting and studying them, there were just so many different species, even in a single habitat, which was at the time a lake along the Scambia River in North Florida, where I was doing my thesis research. And there were dozens and dozens of species that were small, but they looked very much alike until you got them under a microscope and you could see how different they were. Mm-hmm. And so that was sort of fascinating. Sort of was a challenge to then identify them because they were all looked so similar, although different at a microscopic scale. Took a summer job with the state of Florida. We were collecting insects. So I got to see a lot of streams in North Florida. From there, I went on and got a PhD working almost entirely with insects. And one thing after another, I'm still doing it. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. So
Well, and now you hear at Bama Bugfest on the web. Who knew?
the perfect progression.
Right. Interesting. So I'm actually from North Florida too. So I wonder if I've been around some of your old research stomping grounds.
Hey, we were along the Scambia River, so near
Okay.
Pensacola.
Yeah, that's great. I'm from maybe an hour east of there, so not too far away.
Oh, okay.
Which is great. And I went to UWF for a semester, so I was in
And my
Pensacola for a
master's.
little bit. Did you really?
Yeah,
Oh, it's a beautiful campus. I loved that school. Was great.
pretty small when I was there, but I know it's a lot bigger now.
Yeah. um, I went there from I was at UCF in Orlando for a little while, so the change in student population was drastic for me, but it was great. UCF is a large student body, and UWF was this beautiful. It's on a preserve. It's like this gorgeous, naturey campus. Yeah, it
So
was great.
yeah, so when I was there, it was a school of 3,000. I went to Michigan State. It was 40,000.
It's a huge difference. Yeah, it sounds like we had similar shocks. Yeah. So okay, so we've said the certain term, or I've said the term a couple of times already, but aquatic macroinvertebrate. Can you help us just understand what that term means?
Sure. Um, aquatic invertebrate, obviously, are those invertebrates that live in water. The term macro and micro are used just to denote size. So a macroinvertebrate is one that you can typically see and work with without a microscope. There are lots of very interesting and very small invertebrates that you can only deal with through a microscope. But you can work with a macroinvertebrate because it's large enough, and can't maybe see all the details, but you can work with it. And obviously the invertebrates, because they have no internal skeleton, so as compared with vertebrates, for an invertebrate, all their muscles are attached to the outer skin, the cuticle, and so that gives the leverage. Invertebrates, muscles are attached to bones, so that's the leverage there. Macroinvertebrates typically are insects, mollusks like clams and snails, crayfish, worms. So there are lots of macroinvertebrates, not just insects. Insects probably have the most number of species of any of the invertebrates. So hence you get a lot of people interested because there are lots of different types of insects you can work with.
So you said that there's also micro ones. Is there such thing as an aquatic microinvertebrate? Do they use that term at all?
Not really.
Not really.
Not really use that, but they're
Okay.
Interesting, like tardigrades. These are water bears. They're really tiny and they're just really interesting to look at, but they're really hard to find.
Yeah.
And very tiny worms and things like that.
Everyone needs to not only look up all the ones that we're gonna talk about, but everyone needs to look up tardigrades right now, or like not now. Stay here, and then after this, right. They're really cool.
Water bears.
Water bears. Okay, so these aquatic macroinvertebrates, can you tell us a little bit about what their life cycles are like?
Sure. There are two basic types of life cycles for insects here. We separate the two into terms complete and incomplete metamorphosis. And all insects undergo what we call metamorphosis, so that's a change in form during the course of their lives. So we're all familiar with butterflies, because there's an adult. We know that it has a caterpillar stage, which is the immature, the larva, and probably know that it goes through a pupal stage where the larvae encloses itself in a cocoon called a chrysalis. And then during that time, all the tissues of the caterpillar are rearranged to form the adult with all the wings. And so it looks very different. The larvae and the adults look very different under hormonal and genetic control. And of course, it all came from an egg. So it has 4 stages: egg, larvae, pupae, adult. And These insects all go through those stages, although the larval stage might last for a long time in some cases, might be a very short time in other cases. So from weeks to years in a larval stage before the adult stage is formed or it comes out. So beetles, caddisflies, hellgrammites, flies are all types of insects that undergo this complete metamorphosis.
Okay.
And that's sort of a derived characteristic, and the older, really, really old insects, evolutionarily old insects, are things like dragonflies, stoneflies, mayflies, and a lot of the, particularly those and some of the hemipterans, the true bugs. They undergo what's called incomplete metamorphosis, in that they only have an egg nymphal stage to separate it from a larval stage and an adult. So that's has differences, but it's similar to crustaceans and some of the other types of invertebrates that you might see around. And in contrast to those groups that undergo complete metamorphosis, the incomplete, the nymph and the incomplete metamorphic groups look a lot like the adults. Now, they don't have wings, but they do have legs. They the same kind of legs. They have the same kind of projections on the rear end of the bug. The head and the mouth parts look very similar. But it goes through, in the incomplete, you go through a bunch of molts, in an indeterminate number of molts, all depending on the environment. So maybe 4 or 5 up to 30 different species can undergo different, but it all ends up the bug doesn't change its look. It just gets bigger.
Okay.
And then at the very last molt, before it goes into the adult stage, it has formed its wings, but the wings are still inside coverings on the last nymphal stage. The bug crawls out of the water, may crawl on some vegetation, on a rock, on the ground, and the last stage cuticle is split along on the dorsal, the top side, and the bug wiggles out. The adult wiggles out. So I think we've got a video of an example of a stonefly.
Yeah, let's see it.
There it is. Okay, it's sort of struggling out, so we're a little further away. You see the leaves unfolding, or the wings unfolding.
Oh.
Sort of struggling to get out, and almost.
Oh my gosh.
There it is. And now the wings are going to unfurl, going to pump air into the wings, and there they go. They're folding, unfolding.
Oh my gosh.
And so the bug will sit there for minutes to tens of minutes, maybe, for the wings to dry, and then it's available for flight. So,
wow.
So essentially, mayflies and stoneflies and dragonflies all basically look like that. So you can go around to the edges of streams and rivers and ponds and see these exuviae, which is what we call the shell that's left behind, stuck to rocks or aquatic vegetation. Similar to cicadas, you find the exuvia of cicadas stuck to trees this time of the year. So that's the same thing.
Yeah, I think I've seen it happen with a dragonfly once. We were canoeing and there was one on a rock that was luckily like eye level with us. And I remember watching it come out a little. It was toward the end, I think. Anyway, but I just remember seeing the husk or the exudiae stuck up there, and I've only ever seen it in cicadas before, and I'd never seen it in other insects, and it was just so interesting to think. And that's why, do you mind if I play that video one more time?
No, go right ahead.
So that's what makes it so interesting for this one. First off, that entire adult insect fits into a much smaller, really, shell. So they must be, the wings and the body structure must be, I don't know, I'm trying to say not flexible, but softer, I guess, maybe, so it can squeeze in there.
At every molt, the resulting individual has really soft. The cuticle hasn't been really formed yet. It hadn't hardened yet, so it's really soft. So inside that last stage, the tissue of it is really sort of compressed, and then the wings are all crumpled up. It's amazing that it comes out that way because they're crumpled up into a volume that is like 1% maybe of
Wow.
So it has all the veins in it. It has little hollow tubes. You pump those. The animal pumps basically air into the wings, and they unfurl. And then when they dry, they fly away.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's always been fascinating.
That's incredible. So, and you said this one was the incomplete one, and then the complete one is where they have the 4 stages.
Yes.
The egg. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So so those are the 2 portions of the life cycle. Now, another really interesting part of this is what's called life history, and that's a bit more detailed component of within each basic life cycle. Some species spend their entire lives submerged, so they're beetles that do that. Larvae, pupae, adult are all underwater. They never get out of the water. There's some beetles where the larvae spend their lives submerged, a year perhaps. The larvae then crawl out of the water, pupate on the ground, buried under a rock or in soft soil. The adults come out, and then the adults are terrestrial. Then the eggs, once the females lay the eggs, they're back in the water. They lay the eggs back in the water. Larvae die, or the adults then die.
Mm-hmm.
The adults of most aquatic insects don't actually eat. Most of them don't even drink, so they have pretty short life cycles or life histories as adults. There are some exceptions. Dragonflies could live for months. But mayflies, for example, might not live till morning. They emerge, the adults emerge at night and be dead by morning.
Wow.
They have no feeding structures, no way to take in water. So as soon as they desiccate, they die.
Yeah.
Particularly the males do first. The whole point of the adult stage here for insects is just reproduction. Okay. The female lays eggs in a suitable location, and then effectively their lives are spent. It's over. Mosquitoes are different. Dragonflies are, so they're different ones. But
right.
So there are even a few beetles where the larvae spend their lives on land, and then the adults spend the rest of the generation time in water. So they're all different varieties of life histories, whatever fits the environment. So that's one of the complexities, and one of the things that really interested me. There's just all sorts of variations. Some species, here I suggest dragonflies, for example, the whole generation from egg to nymph to adult might take 3 years. There's sometimes the larvae will spend 2 years, 3 years submerged. The adult spends a few months terrestrial. Mates, eggs laid, start over. Other species, there'll be a generation every year.
Okay.
So different species, different scenarios there. I know you're talking about helgrammites earlier. Helgrammites typically have, and some of them, particularly the large ones, the Dobson flies, they'll spend maybe 2-3 years in the water. The larvae crawl out, dig a little cave beneath a rock, crawl in there, pupate, create a cocoon, pupate, and the adult comes out. And of course, it's terrestrial, so there'll be and it won't live for more than a day or two. And I don't think we have a picture of an adult, but it's 3 or 4 inches wingspan, 3 or 4 inches. They'll mate, and then the very slow flyers, so you can almost grab them right out of the air. They're sort of clumsy flyers because they're so big. But they'll mate, and then the whole 3-year life cycle starts over. I always show Dobson fly males to classes, and there we are.
Is that it?
This is a male Dobson fly. So this is when the wings are spread out 3 or 4 inches across. The obvious thing you see there are the mandibles there on the left side. Yep. It looks fierce. It looks like a predator. It's all for show. And the mouth parts are non-functional. That is not, for some species, mandibles are a big part of how they feed. This particular species, the adults don't feed. Huh. This is the mandibles here are used in courtship.
Oh, okay.
So the male will put those mandibles over the backs of the females as a courting gesture.
Huh.
And so all of this happens after 3 years. This all happens in an evening, and then the adults die. The females lay their eggs back in the stream, and it's another 3 years. Now, you'll see adults every year because they're not synchronized. The whole populations are not synchronized. But
okay. No, and the female looked just like this, but without the big mouth parts. Am I right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Actually, the females have mandibles that look more like normal feeding mandibles.
The smaller ones. Let me see if I can find a female. 1 second. We just did an image search for him, so I don't know what's. Oops. Is this it?
Yes.
Okay.
So the head is on the right, and the mandibles you can see sticking out right there. Yep.
Okay. So that one's the female. Okay.
It's called sexual dimorphism. So you see the males and the females have some significant different structural features.
So I kind of like though that the male, instead of getting ready for a date, he's been getting ready for 2 or 3 years and just puts on his big mouth parts for his date with his female Dobson fly.
So there are a wide variety of life cycles. Just find out just about any kind you want, and so there are an awful lot of entomologists. That's what they do. They study life cycles because they really are fascinating.
I mean, I think you mentioned, I feel like maybe the best word that the best word for it, and you've used it already, is that complexity. There is so much differentiation in all of these water insects and I'm sure that there are things that are still being discovered about them today. Right. There's still research to be done, still questions to answer, and maybe even questions we didn't know were questions, but they're gonna show up anyway.
Instances, I have a radar image that a friend sent me. He lives along of Lake Erie, and he sent me a radar image taken from the Weather Bureau, and it looked like it was a storm coming across the river, or across the lake.
Yeah.
Turns out it was a giant emergence of mayflies from the lake, known as a caddis hatch. They're not caddis flies; they're mayflies. But these, right. And we have these hatches along the Black Warrior. Not every year, but I've seen them. And so there's just like on the same day, huge numbers of large adult mayflies will hatch, and they'll fly around, and they're dead by morning.
Oh my gosh! And the ones that we have here are as dense or are a dense cloud, I guess, of them as well.
Yes, they are. Okay. Maybe not caught on radar, but
right.
Then there's this famous photo. I think it must have been taken in the 1940s from Wisconsin, of all these mayflies laying on a bridge over a small river, and cars were sliding on the bridge from slipping on all the dead mayflies.
Oh my goodness.
That were piled up several inches deep. So We always show that in class, so you get the oohs and the ahs.
Right. Yeah. That's a good one. And who knew all of those things that you're slipping and sliding on land started their life in the water.
Right. So there's one of those big groups of insects are called ephemera for obvious reasons. They're ephemeral. So they're just there for the evening and will be because they essentially desiccate because they have no way to drink.
Oh man, that's so interesting. So, I mean, we've just mentioned a bunch of different kinds of ones. Do you happen to have a favorite type of aquatic insect?
Well, I'm pretty I'm omnivorous in a sense in that way. My early time, I was working with a group of flies, aquatic flies called midges, and that's that when I first got started, I realized there were dozens and dozens and dozens of these species. They're all very small. They're worm-like because fly larvae are worm-like. They hatch in large numbers and they swarm around. And I worked on those for my master's degree and for my doctoral degree, and eventually decided they were just too small. I started having floaters in my eyes from too much microscope work.
Oh no.
So I've had students who worked on stoneflies, mayflies, caddisflies, beetles. So I find interest in just about all kinds of insects. And at the museum now, I'm been very interested in butterflies.
Oh yeah. There's a pretty decent size, from what I understand, butterfly collection at the museum to look at.
We've got a couple of really big ones. The Sherlock collection is probably 35,000.
Wow.
From the 1920s to the 1950s.
Oh wow.
We're doing some conservation and databasing of those right now. But I've got a large collection of aquatic insects that the museum had some, and I donated my personal collection to the museum.
Oh, thank you.
So I work with that too. So
okay,
trying to get that organized.
That's great. Okay, so I think we have a presentation for a couple of the ones that we talked about that we liked, and to see if we can talk a little bit about some of them. And some of them I think are ones that you would see maybe more often. Yeah. So what do we have here?
This is a stonefly, the nymph of a stonefly. So the adults are going to look similar, except they're going to have wings. And if you're at all familiar with insects, they all have three major body parts. There's a head, which is up in the upper left section. They have an abdomen behind the head, and in this case, there are three obvious segments that's the thorax. Three segments to the thorax, and then anterior to the right of that is the abdomen. So there are anywhere from 8 to 10 different segments in an abdomen. Different species have different numbers, but all have 6 legs. In this case, the stoneflies have 2 projections at the rear end of the bug. Those are called cerci, and that's a pretty good diagnostic character for stoneflies. They'll look a lot like, the bodies will look similar to mayflies, but mayflies always have 3 cerci.
Okay.
So let's go to the next one. Let's see what that.
Hang on. Let me see if I can get the mayfly.
Yeah,
there it is.
This is the mayfly. Again, body parts are similar, legs are similar, 3 cerci. In this case,
they do look a lot alike, don't they?
Broken. In certain species, that middle cerci will be shorter than the others. They're cerci are pretty fragile, so they break off. So you have to be a bit careful. The mayflies have gills on the underside for one of the ways they get oxygen out of the water. So you can tell mayflies by their gill structure as well.
So
Don't
you
like-
might have mentioned it before, but what are the Circe, what function are they?
Well, I'm not sure other than just balance maybe, or
Okay.
it's left over, from bugs that this evolved from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I have here, oops, wait. Oh, that's one of my favorites. Whirligig.
Yeah, this is a whirligig beetle.
Yes.
So this is interesting in that it's an aquatic beetle, but the adults live on the surface of the water. And they live in groups, usually along the edges of rivers and ponds near the shore. And they all just swing around whirligigging. They're really flat. Sort of see that a little bit.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if you pick one of these up and you're willing to do this, you can sniff its rear end, and it'll have sort of a citrus smell.
Yes, it's one of my favorite things to do with kids in streams when we have whirligigs. We all like to capture them, and I'm sure we're maybe sending the whirligig to therapy, but it's so interesting to show them. We always think it smells like sour apple, like that fake kind of sour apple, like artificial sort of smell. It just I do it for adults too. I grab a couple of them and I jostle them about and I say, "Do you want to smell a bug?" And they say, "Yeah." We always end up smelling bugs.
Smell slightly differently, so they're not all the same. So in this bug, the larvae live submerged.
Okay.
The pupae are submerged, but the adults are not. And in fact, you push them underwater, they'll just pop right back up.
They're buoyant.
And the interesting thing is they have 4 eyes.
Oh.
They have 2 that you can see them in the head here at the upper left. Yes.
Those?
To the right.
Oh, wait, up here.
Right there. That's an eye. That's an eye.
Okay.
And those 2 are above water.
Okay.
Now, you go straight down from right there. That's an eye.
Really?
There's one on the other side, same location, and those are submerged.
Huh.
So it has the capability of seeing both above and beneath the water. So that's a cool thing about whirligig beetles.
Is there, I don't even know how you guys would test eyesight, but is it, do they have similar eyesight abilities? Are the ones above the water clearer than the ones underwater, or vice versa? Is there even a way to test for that?
Well, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
There are people that are clearly investigating the physiology of insect eyesight, because they're the structure of the eye is very different from mammals.
Okay.
It's made up of lots of little lots of little pixels almost.
Oh, neat. Okay.
Tubes, and so all these together then make up one eye, and people have been able to get electrical signals from what are these called ommatidia, each one of these little cells that they can get a signal from.
Wow.
So,
that sounds like micro work, not macro work.
that's lab work.
Yeah, that's lab work. All right, let me get back to this, and I think we have this too.
Yeah, so here are 2 different groups of dragonfly nymphs. Dragonfly behavior and life cycles or life histories are really quite interesting. There's one on the penny here, and then there's one just offset about 1 o'clock from the penny. That one is a bug that sprawls out on the muddy surfaces of pond bottoms and stream bottoms and river bottoms, and just sort of lays there and wait for prey to come by, and lashes out and grabs them and consumes them. This other one here is a different family, but similar. Those are the only 2. We have another one.
Yeah, I have one, but it's covered in.
Oh, that's right. It's covered in clamshells.
It's covered in clamshells. I just thought it was interesting. That's why I pulled that picture. I've never seen one like this before.
Let's leave it on this one since I
okay.
can around the clamshell. Two very interesting aspects of dragonfly behavior is its modes of movement, and then its modes of feeding. And in this case, I'll talk about the movement. The rear end, at the rear end, this animal can draw water in to its rectum.
Oh, wow.
Then it can squeeze it out if it's after a prey item. It squeezes it out, and so the bug sort of is jet propelled towards a prey item.
Whoa.
So often they're hiding actually in the mud with their eyes just above the mud, but with water in their rectum, and they squirt it out, and then they launch themselves towards a prey item.
Whoa.
And the interesting thing about the feeding mechanism is it's jaws, but it's hinged.
Oh.
So like your elbow with two mandibles, two grabbing things at the end of one hand, and these are hydraulically controlled, so they move really, really fast. And there actually, well, we probably don't have time to do that other video that was in the one of the websites I sent, but it happens so fast you can't see it. You can't see the movement, even if you're looking for it.
Let me see if I can pull up that video while you're talking somewhere.
So dragonflies are a really interesting group, and there are lots of people that work on dragonflies. They're a really common component. They're more common in lakes than there are in streams, but they do occur in both.
Now, that jet propulsion thing, is that all dragonfly nymphs, or is that just certain species?
No, I think they all do that.
That's really neat.
Yeah. Some are a bit more of a pursuit predator. I mean, a walking pursuit predator, but a lot of them do have this behavior where they're hiding, and then they sort of surprise a prey item.
I think I'm on the video. What do we know what the video's name is? I'm trying to see. Maybe I don't have it. We might have to. I'll just go ahead and in the comments later, I will make sure that people have access to these websites.
Yeah, there may be one that I had and never did send you. It's kind of a large file.
Oh, okay, yeah. But either way, I think that those websites that you sent that we'll share with everyone later on will be shared in the comments later. So if you want to visit and kind of poke around, then they can do that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about them and how they live, and what their life cycles and life history is. Why are we even talking about them, and why are they studied? Why are they important?
Well, I think there are two primary reasons why the aquatic insects, aquatic invertebrates are important. First, they form a basic component of the food chains in aquatic systems. At the top of the food chain, we consume a lot of fish and large invertebrates. They've got to eat something in order to get to a size, to be there, and to get to a size that's useful for humans or other animals like bears, or which all seen the famous pictures of the bears eating the salmon that are jumping out of the stream, the waterfall. But so they're insects that feed on algae. They're insects that feed on leaves in streams. They're insects that feed on just the organic ooze at the bottoms of lakes and streams and rivers, and convert that food into tissue that larger animals eat. So larger insects, but fish, primarily fish, and other crayfish, lots of other animals, even some mammals. But it's not just the food chain in the stream, but a lot of the emerging insects are eaten by terrestrial organisms, so birds I've seen raccoons eating on crayfish.
Mhm.
So they're food for a lot of larger animals, and particularly if you get up to some of the larger fish, those are fish that we as humans consume, and so they're important. Insects are important. Invertebrates are important as the base of they're called primary consumers, and so they're just above plants as the base of the food chain.
Okay.
The other reason is they're indicators of habitat quality in streams and rivers and lakes. The invertebrates in general. And so here's why. All species have individual environmental requirements. They're genetically set. Lots of species have similar ones, but there are lots of varieties of tolerances. Some of the showier aquatic insects, the stoneflies, the mayflies, the dragonflies, some of the beetles, have really rather narrow environmental requirements, and they're restricted to streams that are well oxygenated, low organic matter, so there's not much organic pollution in the water, and they live very nicely there as long as those conditions are constant. Once they change, then either those individual specimens fail to survive to adulthood, or they don't reproduce if they do, and they slowly disappear from the stream. So they're obviously not present. So there are other organisms that have very broad tolerances. So they may be able to live fine in high oxygenated water, but they can also live in very low oxygenated water. They can live in streams that are relatively free of organic pollution, and they can do okay. They don't dominate because these other specimens are sort of outcompete the stoneflies, the mayflies, dragonflies. They'll outcompete these less tolerant species. But once the mayflies and stoneflies are gone, these more tolerant species flourish and they become dominant. And if you go to a stream and you do the sampling, you can see which one is there. You can see the proportions of which type are there. So they're worms out there, not insects, but worms that can live without oxygen for months at a time.
Whoa.
So if you've got a river has high organic pollution, it'll have, or a lake, it'll have almost no oxygen at the bottom, at the sediment level.
Yeah.
So an organism that requires high oxygen, like a mayfly or stonefly, can't live there. These worms, called tubificid worms, do just fine, and they will just cover the bottom of a lake. And their heads are buried in the mud, and their tails are sticking out, waving around, up in just above the water column. They're only a few inches long, but they're just huge numbers of them. They're bloodworms, which is in fact an insect, which can tolerate no oxygen for days to a few weeks at a time.
Wow.
So that's what survives in a degraded habitat. So if you go out and you do searches for what's there, you can come up with identifications of what's there. You know that there are indicator organisms for clean streams, indicator organisms for polluted streams, because they always occur in those situations. So that's this idea of indicator organisms has been around, I don't know, probably a century. They used to identify in Europe, they used to identify lakes as being this type or that type or that type, depending on which set of midges were present.
Oh, wow.
So, and it was all a matter of how much oxygen was in the water in the late summer at the bottom of the lake. So if it went anaerobic, went anoxic at the bottom of the lake in the summer, then there's only a certain group of bugs could live there survive until fall when oxygen was replenished.
Wow.
So,
No, I think
a lot of government agencies, rather than spending huge amounts of money doing chemical tests, can almost just go look at the bugs.
Right.
Because they've integrated all the chemical aspects of the river for months. Now, it's not quantitative, so
right.
you have to do the chemistry. So,
well, and I think if people are interested in finding out a little bit more about that, I've always learned it as Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3 taxa. But yeah, and I think that's what you're talking about. Whereas Group 1 is not very tolerant of any of that organic pollutions or any of those things. Whereas Group 3 involves things like the worms that you mentioned that were a little hardier, I guess, for those types of environments where there is organic pollution and not as much oxygen. But we cover a little bit of that, or kind of just scratch the surface of it in the Going Buggin' video that we had at 10 today. So if people are more interested in it, they can go back and watch that Going Buggin' video. You can watch Todd Hester, who's an environmental educator, kind of give a little talk about the importance of aquatic insects as indicator species. And he also mentioned, and kind of what you mentioned too, that some of these are underwater for up to 3 years, I'm sure longer for some species of some of these insects. But so that means that, if they're there and they made it to adulthood at that time, that the water quality has been relatively constant for a long period of time, depending on the species, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just fascinating. Who knew those little things crawling under the rock in that stream would be so important?
That's right.
All right. So, do you have any suggestions of resources that people can tap into if they want to learn a little bit more about these aquatic insects, these water bugs?
Well, I have a couple. There is statewide, I think there's a Water Watch program. I think it's run out of Auburn University. And I don't know if they've got a local branch or not, but they're always looking for people to help out. And they go out and they sample habitats and report back. At another level, there are a number of professional societies that have a lot of interest in aquatic insects. And over the years, their websites have actually gotten pretty nice. The Society for Freshwater Studies, Freshwater Science, is one, and they have lots of resources that you can look at and get an idea of the kinds of things. So, yeah, that's the website for the society. There's some videos right there. I think this video was made by an organization called Freshwaters Illustrated, which is a group of aquatic entomologists that just really been doing great innovative work in getting videos of aquatic species, both fish and insects, a lot of it underwater, a lot of it close up.
These images are incredible. Look at those gar.
Yeah, they've been around probably for, I don't know, maybe 20 years now, 15 years. Wow. They've just gotten better and better and better. I use them. I use some of their videos when I taught aquatic insects.
And some of the images on these sites were ones that you and I featured today, actually. Yeah, they are just beautiful pictures.
So that's Freshwaters Illustrated. So they, yeah.
And I brought up the Alabama Water Watch site too, so we can see that. Even though it is hosted by Auburn, we here in Tuscaloosa highly recommend that you go out and check them out. They are a wonderful group of people. It's a group that the museum has been in partnership with before in the past, and we teach their curriculum sometimes as well, or often actually. But it is a citizen science group. You can go and get certified in water quality testing and environmental surveying, and you can help in a citizen science project, which means that, everyday citizens like you and I can go out and assist aquatic researchers in discovering or helping to catalog our environments and water to give them some more information for their research. And also, it's just a great way to kind of, it's a different activity. So if you've got, it's great to do with kids too. Honestly, you can go out and kind of do environmental surveys, and there's a form that you go through, and it's a great way to get to know what's around you, and to, once you're out at a water spot, I think a lot of times we get in the water and sort of just enjoy being in that spot recreationally, but you can do that and kind of get a chance to look at those spaces in a different light with this sort of, ecosystem checklist, I guess. So you can start to pay attention to the vegetation that's around, or, if you're finding any aquatic insects or any number of other things that are on that page that the Water Watch has. So I highly recommend checking out Alabama Water Watch. They're a great group.
I heartily agree. And there's been for a long time a lot of interest in citizen science issues. And some of the things the Water Watch people do are the same things I used to do as part of my professional life, collecting, and certainly for the things I did for my classes. Just take people out and sometimes just sit there and listen and watch quietly, and you can see things you wouldn't think you won't notice if you're sort of walking and talking and not paying attention. So I highly recommend.
And in this situation, whereas I'm sure that you would wish that you could be everywhere all the time in all places, this is another way to help sort of like spread the eyeballs and the note taking out to lots of different places that maybe researchers like yourself couldn't physically get to.
That's right. As researchers, you can only go to so many places, or if you go to a huge number of places, you're there a few minutes or once, and then you have to move on. So, I think that's why a lot of researchers end up choosing a sort of model habitat or a few models, so they can go back and get again and again and again and see the change or not. But it's always changing some.
Yeah.
So you learn about it. I digress just a little bit. We were, Amy and I were part of a group, my wife Amy and I were part of a group studying a wetland down near Moundville, and there's a beaver pond, and the dam broke finally one year, and the beaver didn't repair it. So the water drained down, of course. And over a period of a decade, it went from a pond to a grassland, to like a marsh, to a grassland, to a small forest, to a large forest.
Oh.
So we would still go out there periodically. We were still taking some environmental data out there. You could see this change you read about in books, but you could only see it by going back, frequently enough that you could see the changes. And so that was really fascinating.
And you were able to see it at it sounds like all those stages?
Yes.
Wow,
So we used to take classes out there, and I have photos of when it was, the water had just drained, and I took photos every year of how it changed. And so finally the trees were way up over our heads. And
yeah.
by the time we ended up stopping, it was a forest, small.
That's forest. Incredible. That's incredible. Nature is so cool, everyone. Okay, so do you have any final parting thoughts for everyone here?
I think the take home is that aquatic resources are a really vital part of our economy. Water is certainly critical to our lives, our economies, our civilization, and it's our recreation. The beauty of it needs to be protected and utilized for the purposes, and protected for all of us and for those who come after. The other thing is, whatever happens on the land eventually will end up in the water, because the water is all downhill. So if you're building on the land, there's going to be runoff that goes down to the river, because that's where the water typically always goes anyway, whether it's in a forest or on a new plot of land. So remember, whatever's going on up on the land it'll eventually get into the water, and it'll affect the water quality and our ability to actually even use the water for any purpose, so other than being a drainage ditch. So protect the water, it's important.
Those are wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much. So I think that we have covered a lot of really wonderful information today, and I think that if anyone, if you weren't able to watch this as this was happening, please feel free to know that the comment section is still open, and that if we end up getting any questions a little bit later on, could we send them off to you, Dr. Ward, for some answers? Okay. Yeah, so we'll send them off to Dr. Ward and just get some answers and reply back to your comments. So if you watch this now and are think about it and end up with a question later, or if you watch this video later and have some questions, please continue to comment in the section here, and we'll get you some answers. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us for Bama Bug Fest on the web today. Don't forget to tune in tonight from at 7 for the daily wrap up, where your comments and questions throughout the day will be addressed, and any announcements about the event will be made. Make sure to check us out on July 16th, which is Thursday, for our Stings and Biting Things Day. Content always appears at 10, 2, 4, and 7, and all times are always Central Standard Time. If you aren't able to join us for these live presentations at the time they happen, you can always go back and watch them later throughout the day or next couple of weeks through these archive videos on all of our social media sites and YouTube channels. And you can find out more information about everything we talked about, as well as links to all of our videos on our handy resource guide. And all of that can be found on bamabugfest.org. There's also a full schedule of events on bamabugfest.org, and a list of places where you can access all of this great content. So as always, we want to thank all of our collaborating partners for making this event happen. And mostly, we'd like to thank you, Dr. Ward, for being here with us and talking with us about the wonderful world of water bugs. We really appreciate you spending your time and sharing your expertise with us, and helping us learn a little bit about a subject that I don't think we all think about every day. So it was really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks all for watching.
All right, so we will see everyone next time on Bama Bug Fest on the web, and I hope everyone has a good day. Bye.